And you're good. Great. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for participating and signing on for our presentation for Nurses Week. I have the pleasure of introducing our guest speaker, who is Mr. Jason Gleason, and he's a provider from our Great Falls CBOC. He is a board-certified family nurse practitioner, and he's been a nurse since 1994. So thank you very much for coming down here, and we look forward to the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm social distancing, so I'm going to take off my mask so you can hear and see my lips move at the same time. So welcome to all of you. I have to say this is the first time I'm in front of a live audience, and we're social distance here at Fort Harrison. But it is so fantastic to see all your faces and see your expressions and see some of you maybe fall asleep during the presentation. I don't care. We're a live audience. And to all of you out there, thank you for tuning in. Welcome to Big Sky Country if you're outside of Montana, the best place in the universe to be right now. So I'm thrilled to be here this morning. As Vicki said, thank you for that kind introduction. My name is Jason Gleason. I work at the Great Falls CBOC in primary care. And I also have a passion for treating stroke. Yeah, I've worked in the emergency department at Benefice there in Great Falls since 2006 until starting my career with the VA several years ago, and have a lot of different background with treating patients with stroke. What I'd like to do, we're kind of a smaller group today because of social distancing, but I'd just like to quickly go around and tell me if any of you have experience in treating patients with stroke or a personal experience. Yeah, so we'll start with you up front here.
Hi.
Your name and your experience with stroke.
My name is Sherry Brownback. I am a nurse and I'm working in learning services. And I have not had experience with a stroke patient.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I'm Vicki Tennis. I'm the assistant director.
Wow. You're doing fantastic, it seems like.
I think so.
Yeah, that's good, good.
Well,
Very
I
good.
didn't remember.
There you go. Yeah. How about you? All right, here in our second row. Yeah.
I'm Marcy. I'm in learning services. I was an OR nurse before coming here, so not really any experiences other than a couple patients we had that we did carotid surgeries on that had strokes
Oh,
with
sure.
surgery, but that
Yeah.
was not a little different.
A little different, yeah.
But a little bit of experience.
You bet. Okay.
My name is Wendy. I have been a nurse for 24 years, so I've dealt with stroke patients on a med-surg floor in ER setting and in the ICU.
Thank you for your work. Over here.
I'm Jessica Helms. I'm the clinical care coordinator for inpatient nursing here. Previously, I worked on cardiac step-down units in cath lab, interventional radiology, and then in float here. So I've had experience in all of those areas.
Important work. Yeah. Thank you.
My name's Lisa, nurse on the 4th floor. And yeah, I've been here 8 years, so I've dealt with all stages of strokes and rehab and yep.
Yeah, I'm a nurse on the 4th floor. And I have worked on stroke team and stroke unit.
You have? You're at the VA or? No,
we're
we're at
New York.
Oh, New York. Excellent. Good.
Joseph done nursing ball for quite a while.
Nice.
Deb Charlton.
Good to see you, Deb.
Had a pretty tragic incident working on a delivery for the Montana.
Sorry to hear that.
I'm Trish Elliott. I'm a mental health therapist, so residential. And I haven't had a lot of experience with
Oh, okay. We're glad you're here. Yeah.
JP Magneto, or
Oh, geez. The boss is here.
last time I treated someone with a stroke was obstetrics, and associated with
Devastating.
I'm D.W. Stevenson. I'm the nurse recruiter. In my early career, I worked in level 1 trauma and did follow the NIH trail all those years.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you all for being here. What a diverse background and experience that we have before us. So You know, I love smaller groups because it's more interactive. Who wants to sit through a lecture, right? Nobody really enjoys that. So I love interaction. So if you have questions, and those of you tuning in, if you have questions, please throw those in the comment box. We haven't forgotten about you at all. So, but yeah, just throw in your comments, any questions you may have as we go over our presentation. A few slides. I titled this "Knocking Out Stroke for Our National Heroes," and I can't thank you enough for inviting me here today. And what a week to be here. It's Nurses Week. It's National Stroke Month. So on multiple fronts, I'm just thrilled to be here with all of you. A few housekeeping things. You get continuing education credit for sitting through this. 1.5 credit hours, and there are some things that you have to do to get that, though. You have to attend the entire presentation, no sleeping, nodding off, or escaping. Achieve 100% post-test in the Clinical Skills Plus, and then complete the evaluation form, and then self-certify your completion as well. So keep that in mind to take credit for this. And then to connect virtually, for those of you out there, there's some tips for you and some links here, and this was also in the handout that was distributed to you. And then important disclosures, you know, throughout the slides, you'll see some medications that I'll talk about, some different treatments for stroke. The only connection I have to stroke as far as pharmaceuticals go is Genentech, the manufacturer of Alteplase, TPA, the clotbuster drug. I am a consultant with them. I go down to their headquarters anywhere from 1 to 4 times a year and train their new clinical specialists on stroke. I'm part of that, but I don't, you know, sell the drug. I'm not out there pushing it, that type of thing. But I more work in-house at Genentech to help empower their new clinical specialists. I learned a lot about you this morning with your introductions. I'd like to share a few things about myself. As Vicki mentioned, I'm a nurse practitioner working with the VA, and I love to share these next few pictures. Who here has experienced this? You know, you go over to your grandparents' house, your aunt and uncle's house, you have this huge meal, carb coma is setting in, you have a million things to do, including laundry and putting the kids to bed at home. And it's like, I cannot wait to get out of here. This was a nice dinner, but we have to go. And then they go in the back room and they bring out the albums. Anybody experience this? Yeah, right? Any of you do this to your families, right? Yeah, it happens in my house. I promise I won't do that to you today, but I want to show you a few great pictures of my family. Here's my wife, Heather, and I. We got married 16 years into our marriage. So we got married and we're married for 16 years. And after that, we had 3 amazing kids. Here's Brady, my oldest. And this is when they were really young. Brady's now 24. And Isaac, my youngest, he is now 16. And then Carson is 19. So he's our middle kiddo. So 3 boys, amazing sons. Any Disney fans here? Disneyland just opened up, right? Hooray for that. So thank goodness. But yeah, we're a big Disney family, and we go down there at least once a year when it's not COVID. We try to. And I love this picture because it was from their 50th anniversary. And I love this picture, but then the next one was their 60th anniversary. And how many of you parents out there have your kids replicate the pictures as you go by? I remember this day, you know, we go from this, they're all cute, and they're all compliant, and then this, it's like, Dad, this is so dumb, can we just go on the rides? No, I gotta take 100 pictures to get it right. So, over the years. Here's my youngest, Isaac. He said, Dad, if you ever show this picture to anybody, I'm going to kill you. Because this crazy hair. I said, of course, now that I know that, I'm going to show that to everybody. And so his mom and I used to tease him, you know, you didn't come out of your mom's belly. You just showed up on the porch one day. You had this crazy hair and a cookie and a sippy cup. You were good to go. So, yeah, and he's now 17. And then my son Carson here is now 19. Huge Oklahoma City fan. Any OKC Thunder fans here are out there virtually? So yeah, huge OKC Thunder fans. And here's one of the players from Great Falls that we met at one of the games. And then my oldest son Brady, he's going into education now. He's 24 in college, working on his degree. Yeah, so he does a lot of work with kids. My lovely wife Heather, and our youngest. And then another picture, Disneyland, my middle son. And I just love these pictures because I love my family like you guys do too. So we were just going through some photos of my family here. And my lovely family, again, at our favorite place, Disneyland. Big Disney fans. Why do I share those pictures with you? You know, I love to connect with people that I share this talk with. But for a personal reason, I share those pictures so you can see my family before an event happened. And it's 10 years ago now. It's the 10-year anniversary. The summer of 2011. Why am I so passionate about stroke? Here's your answer why. There were 29 days during that summer that changed our lives for everything. My wife's life, my boys' life, my life. And honestly, as a provider, stroke was something older people got, right? That older person comes into the ER, there's not a lot we can do for them. You know, if they can get the clotbuster drug, great, but if not, well, it's off to rehab and we hope for the best. And all of us have seen patients, you know, that have lived with the aftermath of their families of stroke. So to set your brain up kind of for this time 10 years ago now, it was summer, my boys and I remember it was a Monday, and I went to my wife Heather and I said, gosh, you know, I think I'm gonna take the kids on a father-son trip to Yellowstone. And no sooner could I get those words out of my mouth, she had the door open and said, thank goodness, I'm on your way. Give me a house to myself for a week, right? So my boys and I were gone for 4 days. We came back on a Thursday, and everything was normal. We had a great time, and she had a great time, you know, with a house that was quiet for once. And so we came back, and then that very next day, any Harry Potter fans here are in our audience virtually? Yeah, Harry Potter fans. It was the last movie of the entire Harry Potter series that came out that Friday. We went to a movie, and again, just an ordinary summer day, a fantastic day, until Saturday showed up, July 16, 2011, that changed all of that. And I think that there is no better way to demonstrate that and illustrate that than to play you something on the next slide.
Okay, is she breathing? Are you breathing? Yeah. Okay, how old is she? 40. Okay. Does she have a history of seizures? Do you have a history of seizures? Before. Okay, what's your name? Brady. Brady, what's your last name? Gleason. Okay, and your address one more time. 3104 2nd Street Northeast. Okay, we'll get them up there to you, okay? Alright, bye-bye.
Thank you. There'll be audio on a few more slides. So that audio, and you caught part of it, it was a 911 call. And so, and it just, for me, I presented this over, gosh, 100 times now, coast to coast. Every single time I hear that audio played, it's like ripping open a wound, a scab off a wound. Because it's real. It's my boys were absolute heroes that day, number one, that they even knew, because they were 14, 10, and 7 years old at home alone with their mom. And they knew to call 911. They picked up on something going on with their mom. Just to know that, and they were absolute heroes, as I'll talk about. The first step of stroke is what? Activate EMS, right? So they did that, and then the other part to that just really kills me is my wife's voice is on there as well, you know, background. And so my boys were home alone, and I was working in the ER. That morning, I woke up and said goodbye to my wife as she was putting away groceries in the refrigerator after doing some errands in the morning. In an ordinary summer day, and I'm a half hour into my ER shift, and my nurse comes into the exam room and says, you know, EMS is on the phone. Your wife, she's talking, she's moving. She was even able to walk out onto the sidewalk to get on the stretcher, but something was off. She had a headache, she was dizzy, her eyes were looking a little different. There were just some subtle things that are going on with her that wasn't right. So they even said, she's fine, but we're going to bring her into the ER to be checked out. So they brought her into the ER, and I remember they wheeled her past me, and she was still moving and everything. They get her into a normal exam room. They're looking at her, hooking her up to a monitor, getting her into a gown, things we do as nurses, right? And so I remember sitting there at the gurney, at the base of her gurney, rubbing her feet and just trying to be reassuring as everything is falling apart inside me. As healthcare providers, you're going through that list, the differential in your head, right? What's going on? And I tried to be reassuring. And I'll never forget it because I was rubbing her feet and I said, I love you and it's going to be okay. And she looked up at me and she said, I love you too. 10 years and it still chokes me up. And those were the last words that she had ever spoken, ever. I love you too. Like almost one last message to my boys and I, right? So we found that she had a basilar ischemic stroke. And she had a blood clot in her leg, they think, that can EVT. She had a condition called alpha syndrome, where you get blood clots. We had no idea that she had this until they did a workup. And she threw a blood clot up her leg. She had a VSD, a heart defect that she had since she was born. It crossed over to the chamber and got pumped up into her basilar artery. And then sadly, she was in a locked-in state. Anybody deal with patients in a locked-in state? Yeah, I bet you have in New York, right? See the amount of strokes you have? Yeah, absolutely horrific. Virtually, those folks that you joining in, a locked-in state, it's where Your brain is totally normal. You can think, you can have an itch, you got to scratch, you can be in pain, you have to have the urge to go to the bathroom, you can feel hunger, you can feel love and those emotions. Your brain is absolutely perfect and functioning, except for where it connects to your spinal cord. So it truly is locked in. It's like if somebody gave you a paralytic and you were fully awake, like during surgery, but you woke up and nobody knew that you were awake. You're fully in there. So locked in syndrome, she was in. And she stayed in that state for 29 days. I remember the day they came to me and said, your wife is not coming home with you. Because you hang on to hope, right? Especially when you got 3 little boys looking at you. Dad, when is mom coming home? And you hang on to the hope. But I remember the day they said, sadly, she's not coming home. They were real. You know, they were compassionate, but they were real. She's probably going to have to go to hospice. So we made that difficult choice. And there's some pictures. Again, it's like that audio. It's like ripping a scab off a wound for me. But I think it's so important to show you this, and I show every audience this because it makes stroke real. We think stroke is for the elderly, those older people that come through the ER. This makes stroke real for you. It sure does for me. These pictures are more pictures from our journey in hospice. And again, what was and what the devastation of stroke presented. And also, the hopeful, the positive thing in these pictures, if there's anything positive, is this. These smiles here, the love that a kid has for his mom, that's something stroke can never take away, right? So those are the things that I hang on to these pictures. Hospice was amazing. Peace Hospice, anybody ever have family there in Great Falls? Fantastic organization. We had an opportunity to, and I tell you this for your patients too, a piece of advice. They came to me and they said, you can have hospice in your home or she can go to Peace Hospice House. And they said the difference is the hospice nurses coming into your home, they're there for a few hours, but then you're the caregiver, you're the caretaker, you're the one that changes linens and turns your wife and takes care of her physical needs. Being in the Peace Hospice home, and here's what you can tell your patients when you're talking about the difference. It allows the family to be the husband or the wife, you know, and not the caretaker. And I am so appreciative of that. And they were absolutely amazing. In the summertime, they allowed us to take Heather and all of her equipment and everything out into this amazing garden outside. And my boys absolutely love that. And again, the hope in this picture, the positive thing in this is, here's my son Isaac. He doesn't see stroke. He sees his mom, right? Yeah. And just a kid's love for his mom. This picture here really strikes me. It is about 2 a.m. And this was on our 16th wedding anniversary, which is absolutely my favorite wedding anniversary of all. I say that and you think, your favorite, your wife is dying of a stroke. It was my favorite because I knew that days were limited, hours were limited. And how often does it happen in life? We don't really appreciate the things we have until we know they're not going to be there much longer. So I just remember this night and just being so appreciative of the time we had. In hospice, again, they were absolute angels that came in and set up these moments. The other thing I struggle with, any of you lose a spouse here? Anyone? Yeah, one of the things that I just destroyed me was, I remember asking friends and pastors, everyone, how do I tell my boys that their mom isn't coming home, but in our faith background that she's going home? How do you tell I tell my kid, these beautiful brown eyes, just look into his face and say, your mom is dying, you know? So I'll never forget this day. We were riding in my truck. And he was in the back seat, and we were riding home from the hospital. It was like any other ordinary ride for him, and he's just a kid. And he's like, gosh, Dad, you know, where are we going next? And we're just having a routine conversation. How many of you have rear view mirror conversations with your kids in the back seat, right? Usually I'm telling, do not stick your chicken nuggets behind the back seat, because I'll find it in 6 months petrified, right? Anybody? Yeah. But on that day, he looks up at me in the rear view mirror, and he says, you know what, Dad, I know she's dying. I know she's not coming home. He's 7 years old, you know? So that's another big thing that your patients, that they struggle with, is how do you tell your family, especially when they're your kids this age. We had a fantastic nurse practitioner that paid photographer to come in and take our last family photos, which are such a blessing for us to have now. Just horrible memories, but thankful for them. Hospice, as I said, absolutely. Anybody here a hospice nurse in your past? They're absolute gold. Yourself, where did you work?
I worked
You
just as a volunteer to be family member.
Oh, you're absolute gold. Top of the crop as far as all nurses go, in my opinion. I refer to them like yourself as the Keebler elves of love and gushiness when you need it most, because at every turn they're doing things to bless the patient and the family. And they told us, you can take over Peace Hospice, you can bring your 125-pound St. Bernard, we allow pets, and he can run up and down the hall, we don't care. We didn't do that. But Heather had a bird in her room, a canary that would sing, things that would drive people nuts, you would think. But they were amazing. We had parties, we wheeled her bed all around the place, and this is from one of those evenings where we had a party because we recognized that her brain was fully intact. And some strokes, they're not, they're gone, right? Depending on what center it gets hit. But in her case, being locked in this body, but yet being fully aware and conscious, we wanted to make every day special for her, and they allowed us to do that. I remember taking pictures and videos of this journey through hospice, not because I wanted to journal it, but because I didn't know what picture would be the last, what video would be the last. And this is out in the garden of hospice, and about a half hour after this, wheeling her back in. It was hot outside, so we were moving her back inside. And she had passed away about 30 minutes after this video was taken. So pictures I share with you, not to make you bummed. The last thing I want is my audience leaving and saying, oh, that was the worst presentation. My day sucks now because I heard this horrible story. But I share this story to make it real, because what I get excited about is what we're going to talk about next, is the things we can do about stroke and how we can treat it to get good outcomes. And that's where my hope comes. But I do this to make it real. A few little life tokens that I like to share with you. This is that scarf that I showed on my anniversary. I'll never forget it. Again, not for the devastation of stroke, but something that stroke could never take away, right? And as healthcare providers, as doctors and nurses and administrators and educators, it's so important, I would think, for us to encourage our patients to hang on to these things, these tokens of hope. This here, as you can see up here, a bag of lip gloss. And I swear to goodness, there's every kind of flavor of any kind of food item you would want to hear. Coffee and M&Ms and Sprite and ice cream cones. And this actually even has the label from hospice still on it from 10 years ago. And I remember the day my 14-year-old son, who was going into high school, I mean, he should have been nervous about going into high school and enjoying that planning and anticipation of starting that part of his life. But here he was, it's summertime, and he left hospice and he came back with a bag full of lip gloss. And I thought, these are amazing. And I'm thinking, I don't know what these are for, but wow, this is very cool. Brady, that you went to this. And he said, yeah, Dad, I had to go into stores like Claire's and all over the place. He's 14, he's like a football player. And I said, well, that's fantastic. And I said, what are we going to use these for? And he's 14 years old. And he said, well, Dad, Mom, she may not be able to eat anymore because of her stroke, but guess what? Guess what? I went and got all her favorite foods. And this 14-year-old son putting lip gloss on his mom's lips and saying, here's your M&Ms, Mom. Can you taste those? Imagine that. That's something that stroke can never take away. This little frog here, he has survived 10 years now. And he's pretty amazing. My middle son, Carson, who was 10 at the time, he was great at those crane games. Anybody really good at those? I suck at those. I spend $60. It's like I could have bought 10 stuffed animals for that much money, right? But not Carson. Carson would do it on the first try to get a stuffed animal, usually every time. So he came back from a crane game of some kind of hospice and brought this in. And Heather, the only function that she could have in her extremities was involuntary. She'd dig her fingers into her palms and get some sores. And they tried everything, splints and pads, but this frog. And so I didn't know what the frog was for. I thought he was just cute. Oh, let's lay that by your mom. Look, Heather, look what Carson got you. And 10 years old, he says, no, Dad, it's so she can squeeze the frog instead of digging her fingers into her hand. And I thought, you're 10 years old. How thoughtful is that for a 10-year-old for his mom? I think the frog probably thinks it wasn't very thoughtful because he got the life squeezed out of him. But, just again, something that stroke can never take away from people. I remember, I mentioned earlier the Keebler elves of love and gushiness, like you in the back. Thank you so much for the work you do. They just surprise you with treats all the time. Things that are very memorable. And I remember the day I went into hospice, and they came up to me with several of these molds, and they said, we have a gift for you and your boys. And I was blown away. They brought this out, and this is actually a hand mold that they had made when Heather was still living. And as healthcare providers, this here, I have to tell you, as a family member of a patient, this is gold to us. So if you ever have a patient that is terminally ill, still alive, it's like less than $5 to make this mold, but this is like gold, platinum gold, my boys and I. And what they said to go along with it, they said, soon, we don't know if it's going to be hours or days or a week, but soon, we know it's going to be soon. Your wife is not going to be here any longer. And whether it's hours or days or weeks or months or years or a decade from now, there will be days when your 3 kids, even when they're adults, want to reach out for their mom's hand. She's not going to be there. And so we want to give you this so she's always there with them. And I thought, that's just amazing. I think they're either Keebler elves of love and gushiness, or they just like to see people cry. Because I did my share of that, but this is an absolute amazing gift that we can do for our patients. They usually do them in the NICUs, right, or nurseries for babies that sadly pass away. But why not do that for any patient, right? Under $5, Yeah, absolute gold. And then the last token I have here for you is something that stroke can never take away from our personal journey. Was a letter that my son wrote in March of this year, and she had her stroke in the summer. But hindsight is everything, and this is the last love letter that a 7-year-old would write his mom. And it has the spelling of a 7-year-old. I don't think he won the spelling bee this year, as you can see up here too. But dear mom, are you dowing or doing good? Walking, should be working. I love you, Samak. I think he failed spelling this year. I hop, you have a good day. We snaggle or snuggle along. And I found this, and again, I remember being destroyed in our walk-in closet of our bedroom when I found this the day I thought, wow, the significance of this, but to encourage our patients to hang on to these things, because they are true gifts in a positive way. It's stuff that the stroke or the heart attack or the cancer, whatever their family member had, can never take away, true power in that. So those are some of the life tokens from our journey with stroke. Our hearts look broken, just like this one. And where do you pick up the pieces? Your wife just died, you're 39, you just spent your 16th wedding anniversary at hospice. You have 3 little boys. I remember asking friends, family, pastors, what do I do now? Where's the 10-item checklist to go through this and to work through grief? And the stages of grief, that's important, but it's not something you just completely move on from. It's a life journey through grief. And they told me that. They said there'll be days where 2 decades from now it might hit you, and all of us have lost somebody, right? So we experience that ourselves. So again, hospice came to our rescue, and the people affiliated with hospice. As healthcare providers in Montana, we have Camp Francis outside of Great Falls. It's at the Rotary Club about 20 miles out by Monarch. Outdoors, there's cabins. And I remember them telling me, be sure to sign your kids up for this. They have a camp coming up right now for little kids at the beginning of summer, and then teenagers in the fall. It's free. Loved ones do not have to pass away at hospice to qualify. Yeah, and it can be a parent, it can be a distant relative, anybody where that kid has lost somebody significant in their life. And I remember them telling me, because I was thinking, oh, it's camp. That's the last thing my kids want to do now is a camp. They said, no, this is a camp like no other, because this camp, 1 week at camp is worth a whole year's worth of therapy to your kids, honestly. Again, it chokes me up. I picked up my little boy who was 7 after this camp. And he said to me, Dad, it's like the camp, it helped my heart empty out all its tears. It's amazing. I'm smiling. I'm smiling again. That's what they do. Tons of play therapy, tons of meaningful events for their loved one. I remember driving up to camp after dropping my kids off, and I couldn't wait to see them and wondering what kind of camp this was. And I'm driving up this road, and there are different groups of people out in this big field, parents and people gathered around all the kids individually, in this one big group with this kid in the middle. He was dancing like Elvis. I'm thinking, what kind of camp did I drop my kids off at? This doesn't seem like a hospice camp. And it was my son Isaac here. He was actually hula hoop champion at the camp that year. So yeah, but they do lots of fun stuff. And again, they have one for older kids in the fall, the teenagers. And then the cool thing about it is the teenagers can then volunteer they can give back and volunteer for the younger kids camp, as well as adults can do that. So such a great program. They didn't have it last year. They're having it this year. So if you know somebody that lost somebody recently, or even in the past that just needs some extra help, it's a great camp to do. Other cool things that we do, which I'm sure a lot of you do, both live here and virtually, you do stuff that are memorable for the loved one that you lost. And we celebrate Heather's birthday every May. It's coming up. And And my kids love to bake cakes. I don't think Food Network called anytime soon over the years. And some years they went right in the trash, you know, but yeah, it's the thought that counts, right? So yeah, cool things like that. And then the 4 Coyotes, it's funny, how many of you name your family when you go on vacation or get shirts, you know, bright orange shirts so you don't lose somebody, right? Anybody else do that? Please say yes, right? But our first family vacation came up, and where were we going to go? Disneyland. And in California, where we love to visit, and yet it was our first vacation without the person that should have been there with us. So how do we shift our focus from having, you know, to having fun again, not missing someone that we wish was there with us the whole time? And so as Clark Griswold would say, I came up with a name for our family that was super corny. And at first I thought, you know, I think the Wolf Pack, that sounds really cool. I think we're going to be known as the Wolf Pack. I'm going to get shirts with Wolf Pack on it. That's what I tell the boys. They'll think it's cool. I told a buddy that, and he's shaking his head because 10 years ago, about that time, anybody see the Hangover movies, right? The Wolf Pack. And he's shaking his head. It's like, what? You don't like the Wolf Pack? And he said, dude, you want your 7-year-old going to school and telling his teacher, I'm part of the Wolf Pack. We're going to Vegas, stir it up, you know? So we settled on the 4 Coyotes. And of course, the shirts come from that. So I had shirts, and my boys, I think, wore it once, right? So kind of a Clark Griswold, kind of corny thing for our family. But the importance of this is it transitioned into something really cool for stroke care, which I'll share towards the end of our presentation, which I think is pretty cool, and hopefully you'll think it's cool too. So that's our journey up till now, and through hospice and the loss, a patient perspective, a family perspective, joining the fight. What can we do when we're faced with certain circumstances in our life? And all of us have circumstances, right? There are days that are just horrendous for all of us, and we meet challenges. We have choices to make, as you know. And I love this picture because it kind of talks about those choices. You know, one choice might be drugs or alcohol, right? One choice might be sex and gambling, or frequent trips to Vegas where we're spending all our money. And another choice might be something positive, something healthy that we can do. And that's what I was faced with, right? And where do I want to go with this? Because there were days, all of us have lost somebody. All of us have had days that have been horrible in our lives. And we're faced with these choices. And I contemplated a lot of that. You know, a lot of negative things. Thankfully, I didn't, because I had a good support system around me. So I chose to do something positive. And I love this kind of came to me in a vision, this quote, don't allow your loss to change you, but use your loss to change the world. Use your negative circumstance, whatever it is, to let something positive come from that. And I'll build upon that in the next few slides. I wanted to knock out stroke, literally. It took my wife, it took my boys' mom, so I wanted to make some kind of positive impact with stroke care. And so I found this fantastic organization through the Department of Health and Human Services, the Montana Stroke Coalition. If any of you have a passion for stroke, like in the back with all of your experience, for example, they take volunteers. And what this organization does, we meet once a quarter. We empower critical access hospitals, larger facilities, to just knock out stroke. We give them telestroke services and the hardware and everything that goes along with it. We do a lot of stroke education. We have a conference every year that we have, and I'll talk more about that. I love graphics design and web design, so I became their kind of web guy. So I redesigned their website. And in Montana, it's unique. When I joined this organization, it was so fragmented. And what I found, even in Heather's case with her stroke, providers didn't know what different facilities offered as far as stroke care goes, and that causes delays. So I really wanted to make a site that was functional. So what I did is I surveyed every facility in Montana, critical access, larger hospitals, to see what services they had. Did they have a CT scanner? Did they have Altaplace available? Did they do revascularization procedures with the endovascular stints that they have now? Are they able to fly people around? Do they have telestroke? Because before this, it was so fragmented, we wouldn't know what different facilities were doing. So now, if you have a patient, for example, that comes to Fort Harrison with a stroke, you go to montanastroke.org, you look up the Rapid Resources page, it tells you every place in Montana and what they have for stroke. You get them to where they need to go. Okay, then how are we going to get them there? All those resources are here for a provider in your emergency department, for example, to look up. Yeah, but they're out of the window for treatment, right? It's going to take forever to fly them there. How long does it even take to fly somebody somewhere? Guess what? There's a calculator here. It's just like Google Maps. You type in your location, you can type in where you want to fly them to, and it's a flight calculator, not ground. So everything is there for your providers to make rapid decisions for their patients. So that's kind of cool about our website. Again, montanastroke.org. Also, every stroke resource in our entire state. Our stroke team Every facility in Montana is listed here. I'd love to add Fort Harrison to that and their stroke information as well. The coolest thing that I get excited about our coalition though is our stroke conference, because even that was fragmented. Facilities would have their own little stroke event. But in 2017, we decided, let's combine our efforts. Let's make this big. You know, we want to be like the Oscars of stroke care for the Northwest, not only just our state. So we brought in big headliners for keynote. Dr. Kamal, she's actually from Canada. I'll talk about her. Jeffrey Saber, Time is Brain. Everybody know about that? Dr. Saber came out with this study. That's what all the Time is Brain stuff is based on. He's out of UCLA. He spoke at our conference in 2019. Ed Joust, ER physician back east. Guess what? He's the head author of the stroke guidelines from AHA. He just spoke at our conference virtually 2 weeks ago. So we're making a difference in stroke care. My part in this, I just love to motivate organizations to make positive change for stroke, and I've done that across the country, given this presentation in similar places. The thing that I absolutely love is one day my son came home from high school and he said, Dad, I want to do stroke care at my high school. How can we do this? Let's create a program. So we created a curriculum for high schools, which is fantastic. We taught 2 health classes the first year. Last year, I volunteered again. Anybody have a teacher as a spouse or family member? They're absolute gold. And I have no idea how they do it on a daily basis. I taught 9 health classes in one day. I was exhausted. Yeah, it was much more intense than any day as a nurse. So really appreciate your teachers. And my son, the band that I passed out to all of you, he created this as part of this event. So something we can give high school students and make them aware of stroke as well. Stroke care in Montana. Let's take a look at this. Where are we at? We are on the best place on the planet, right? Who would trade that for anything? We wouldn't, correct? So it is really a great place, but as far as stroke care, it feels like this a lot of times, right? Drought. We don't have a lot of resources in Montana for stroke care, but we have more than what we think. Let's take a look. Here's some more of stroke in Montana. Here's our EMS services. I don't know, this is how it is in Great Falls. Is this how it is in Fort Harrison sometimes? And here's the stroke center, right, in Great Falls. Fort Harrison, you guys like this too? Lobotomies, I think they're even free, you know, for your stroke patient. You know, it's funny, I showed this out at Columbia University. There were a few people in the audience. I knew you guys still rode horses. And it's like, come on. And then I showed them what we're doing in Montana, and they were blown away. It's like, this weekend, we had better numbers than they did. So, yeah, anyway. So where are we at in Montana? Population compared to California is way different, right? 1 million to 39. Square miles is very similar though, right? Geographically. Comprehensive stroke centers, we have 0. Not one comprehensive stroke center in Montana. Missoula comes close with what they're doing with endovascular care, but we don't have any. And they're not certified because they don't have the volume, you know, being our population size. California, 18. How many do they have in New York? You mentioned New York. Countless, right? Yeah. Your problem was, where do we send them? Because we got so many resources, right? Overlapping each other. So, yeah, so that's a big challenge for us. Here's Montana, the larger cities or towns, I should say. Glasgow is kind of a frontier out there. But Missoula does endovascular care. So they're a good center to go to. And I understand, I talked to your ER folks. They actually sent somebody to Missoula for treatment because of that. So we have our larger population areas in Montana. When I did that survey, I surveyed 60 facilities. A lot of them are not Circle Under because they're small critical access, right? Good enough though, 47 of those had CT scanners. You need that in order to rule out a hemorrhagic stroke so you can treat an ischemic stroke. 47 had alteplase. How many of you, and we'll talk about alteplase, how many of you know how much alteplase costs per dose per patient? Any guesses?
I know it's expensive.
Expensive. Yeah. Any guess out there? 5,000. Double that. Triple that. 10 to 15,000 for one dose. Do you want to be the nurse mixing that drug? You're going to be shaking. I hope I don't drop this. I hope, you know, you're double checking everything, right? For an institution, it's about 6,000. So that would be a patient fee, and it's all based on insurance, so there's some variation. But the cool thing about doing the survey is I found one critical access hospital, you know what they said? We'd loved it. We'd love to carry the stuff, but you know what? We might see 1 stroke a year. So what's the point? To that 1 stroke a year, it's life-saving, right? But that would eat our whole pharmacy budget up. It expires, and then we're out that money, right? Or let's say a nurse mixes it in an incorrect way, or the patient passes away or recovers. They don't need the alteplase, right? Well, what do we do now? We just spent $6,000 out the door. That wipes out our budget. Here's the cool thing that they didn't know that I found out through the company. working with them, they'll replace it at no cost to the institution. How cool is that? Even if somebody mixes it, drops it on the floor, mixes it incorrectly, the patient didn't need it, they'll replace it at no cost. They're super generous in that way. It expires, they replace it. So really, there's no excuse for facilities not to carry the medication. Fully billable to insurance. And then 9 have access to flight teams, 17 had telestroke. That's, as I just checked that number out a few days ago, which is good. We have a long way to go in Montana. Nice if all 60 had telestroke. And then 1, Missoula, had endovascular care. So for brain anatomy, just briefly, because we don't want to stir heartburn among all of us, go back to our A&P days, right? So when you think of stroke, I love this slide because it talks about what the brain does in these different areas. Just keep that in mind, and you'll have handouts or access to this online. This is the most important one, though, because stroke care has changed quite a bit. Now we really need to find out if the stroke is in a small vessel or a larger vessel. How do we do that? Not just a CT scan, but a CTA, where we shoot dye up into their head. Then it maps out the blood vessels. And why is that important? Because I'll talk about it here in a few slides. We have Alteplase, the clot buster drug for ischemic stroke, right? And now we have endovascular care, where they take a wire-guided stent device and they drag the clot out, but it only works in larger blood vessels. But it's life-changing, and I'll talk about that in a few slides. So keep that in mind. CT scans of the head, as you know, bleeds show up as white. I give this slide to some audiences. The reason I have this, because most of you know about this, is some people think, oh yeah, we use CT to diagnose ischemic stroke. They actually don't. The only reason we do a CT scan on somebody, and it's super important, we have to, is to make sure they don't have a hemorrhagic stroke, to differentiate the two. Because if they have a hemorrhagic stroke, you don't want to give a clot buster drug, right? Because that's going to make the bleeding worse. But it's to rule out. But ischemic strokes, some fancier, newer CT scanners can pick up some ischemic strokes. But normally, we're trying to rule out a bleed inside the brain. So that way, we can green light it and go ahead and give them the medication that will break up the clot. Time is brain. I mentioned Jeffrey Saber, total rock star. 2006, a golden oldie of a study. But get this, from that study, his team was actually able to quantify 2 million brain cells are dying off every minute we take to treat a stroke. Every minute that goes by. And I share this with every audience at an institution. I encourage board secretaries, board clerks to go to this presentation, or at least have this information shared with them. Because if you tell your secretary, who has a ton of orders to file through, a stroke comes in, they got a pile of orders, guess what? They're an important part of the team. The registration person up front is an important part of the team. Why? Because every minute that goes by, 2 million brain cells are gone. What does that tell your ward clerk or your registration clerk? Stroke comes in, they got to take precedence over everything else, because 2 million brain cells are dying off every minute it takes for me to type in their information or get that order for that CT. You know, we don't want to delay. Even more so, the 14 billion synapses, the connections between those brain cells are wiped out every minute that a stroke goes untreated. And then 7.5 myelinated fibers that cover the nerves, yeah, they're gone as well every minute that a stroke goes untreated. So that really stirs the importance of stroke. Dr. Kamal, who was our first keynote speaker at our stroke conference, she's an engineer. She doesn't even work as a nurse or a doctor. She's an engineer, but she has revamped across Canada how they approach stroke. Because the stroke door-to-needle time, the goal from when the patient arrives in the ER until they receive Alteplase, the clot buster drug, the goal is 60 minutes to get the CT, to get the IVs going, labs if they need it, to get all that done. Door-to-needle, they call it, within 60 minutes. She was brilliant. She said, why 60 minutes? Why should we shoot for 30 minutes? You know, because every minute that a stroke isn't treated, brain cells are dying off. She brought up this Parkinson's law, which is kind of a theory that, and all of us have experienced this, right? You're told that you have a major test coming up in 30 days. How many of you wait till day 29 to start studying? Right? All of us do that. Now we know, well, we got some time. And with Alteplase, the clot buster drug, yeah, we got 3 hours to 4.5 hours. Of course, your team is working diligently to get that on as soon as they can. But, you know, we got time. We're still within the window. But, yeah, if we work faster, if we set the bar higher for ourselves, we can meet that. Other key thing about her article, which radically changed how we approach stroke at the hospital I worked at, is she set the goal from 0 to 60 to 0 to 30. The other focus, though, was for the bean counters. You got to go cheap. You got to make cheap changes to your programs, things that don't cost a lot of money that you can do, and there's a ton that you can. Look at it through that kind of process development. Is expensive will never fly. You got to keep things cheap. And then you have to treat stroke like a medical emergency Rather than just put that old person in the back room, yeah, we'll get to it, it's a stroke, we know they're not going to recover, we'll get them off to rehab. Kind of that apathy to treating it like a heart attack, right? That comes through the door. We got to treat stroke emergently like that. Major trauma. So 30 ways to get to 30. I came up with this worksheet for organizations, and just sit down and brainstorm and look at your stroke process. Okay, where can we shave time off? You know, and I'll go over that a little bit in some slides on how we change things. Why is that so important? With my wife's stroke, it took door to needle time is what? 0 to 60? 0 to 30 is a good goal. And my wife's stroke care, 233 minutes. Arrived at the ER at 13:07, did not get alteplase, the clot buster drug, till after 5 o'clock. How many brain cells does that equal? 442 million. That's a bucket load of brain cells, obviously, and I showed pictures of the devastation, right? So that's why I'm so passionate about this time is brain thing, because all the brain cells we can save, the better. Types of stroke. We'll briefly cover this. It's stuff that you already know. It's a quick review. You have hemorrhagic stroke where the pipe is burst. Ischemic stroke where the pipe gets plugged up, right? Transient ischemic attack or mini strokes, they usually recover fully. Then they'll come back to your facility a few months later with a similar thing. And it's kind of the warning sign for a big stroke that's going to happen. And then you have this cryptogenic stroke. And cryptogenic stroke is kind of unique in the sense that the definition of it is, it's that patient that keeps coming back. They're not TIAs, they're actual strokes. So every time they come in, yeah, their arm was paralyzed, and then they come in a month later, now I can't see out of my right eye. They come in again, now I can't talk right, you know, so it's so devastating. And their team, they do these big workups. They do the King of Hearts because they think, oh, it's atrial fib, they're throwing clots. King of Hearts, you know, how long does that stay on? For weeks to months, right? The Zeo patch, we use this a lot in Great Falls. You guys use the Zeo patch? Fantastic, but it's 2 weeks, right, of readings. So we use those tests, and no atrial fib, it's sneaky, it's not showing up. Cryptogenic stroke is a stroke where we just don't know why they're having strokes, but they keep having these devastating strokes. There's a link between atrial fib, we think that's the big culprit, causing these recurrent strokes in these old folks, and we're missing it. Why are we missing it? Because in cryptogenic strokes in these patients, it takes 84 days is the median time before we pick up their AFib. King of Hearts is not going to pick it up. It doesn't stay on that long, right? A Zeo patch is not going to pick it up. This device here is super cool. Let me show you this. And I'll put that up to our camera there. Super tiny, the size of a pin cap, right? And I'll pass this around to all of you. I have no connection to Medtronic that makes this one. There's other companies that make them. It's a fantastic device. It's put in an office procedure, nurse practitioners, physicians. You don't have to be cardiac. A lot of folks will refer to cardiology to do it, but the company will actually come and train you how to do this. You can bill for it. It's paid for by insurance. You make a simple 1-inch incision in the chest wall into the sub-Q tissue. It doesn't touch the heart at all. Patients always ask about that. It just stays implanted right in the sub-Q tissue in the chest. Guess how long this device can work for? 3 years. You get a little bedside monitor. It reads to the monitor for up to 3 years. It just stays in the patient. So that's how we're picking up on atrial fib beyond the King of Hearts, the Zeo patches, and the like. I asked the rep, you know, would you come to the VA and train VA? I'd love to come to the VA and train VA people how to do this. So that's something that organizations want to do. It's a definite benefit to have, especially for this unique population where they have that. Impact of stroke. Some statistics. Again, you might be familiar with this. 800,000 Americans have a stroke every year. It's the 5th leading cause of death. And when you look at total strokes, ischemic strokes, the blockage kind, they're the majority of strokes. So that's the focus of this presentation. I don't really touch on hemorrhagic. And out of that, large vessel strokes are a big chunk. Why is that important? Because we can do more about that. We can do endovascular care for those patients. Across the United States, this graph is kind of cool. This is from, I believe, 2019. But stroke death declines have stalled. Montana is doing really good. We've continued our progress with stroke care, but in a lot of areas it's stalled, slowed down our improvement in stroke care, or it's actually reversed. So we've got work to do as a country with stroke care. Even though we're doing good, we've got to stay ahead of the game. Here are some interesting stats for veterans specifically. 6,000 veterans per year are admitted to VA facilities with a stroke, and all of us know those patients, right? Pretty dramatic. I love this picture. June Fremont, I'd add her name here. Her history, if you Google her, she's amazing. She's the first female Marine ever, right? Yeah, absolutely amazing. So I had to plug her there a little bit. I love that smile. 60,000 stroke-related VA outpatient visits per year. We see that every day. I see that in Great Falls, as I'll share with you. So all of us are impacted by that. And then this is eye-catching. The look on this guy's face is priceless. He's like, say what? $250 million. Yeah, spent annually by the VA to treat acute strokes. And even higher than that, that's to treat the acute strokes, but all the aftermath of that, the cost goes way up, right? Stroke scales, you'll see these, and that's why EMS is so important. They should have a seat at the table. For Fort Harrison, who does EMS for Fort Harrison? Is it the Helena area, or do they have their own EMS system? Do they bring you patients, or how does that work?
It's through St. Peter's and Eagle Ambulance.
Oh, okay, good. All right, so they're an essential part of your team, and I really advocate for them, if you put a stroke team together in your facility, to really have them at the table as well, because all stroke care starts at the house. With the stroke scales, and you'll see Cincinnati, there's multiple ones here. We won't do a deep dive on all of these, but there is a difference. Cincinnati has been out for a while. It's super easy to do. You have facial droop, arm drift, slurred speech. Any one of those in a patient, 75% chance they're having a stroke. And that's good to know even as hospital workers, right? You see somebody on the floor that has any of those symptoms, 75% of the time they're having a stroke. And then severity scale, large and small vessel strokes. Remember how I told you about the importance? Because large vessel, we can do more for with the endovascular stints and that type of thing. They have 2 points or more on this scale, 83%, it's a large vessel stroke that's going on. Why is that important? You're feeding that information to your ER folks. Why? Because now they're going to get flight on the line and start thinking, let's get this patient out of here. You know, we can start that clot buster drug, Alteplase, they call it drip, and then we're going to ship them out to somewhere larger like Missoula they can get to, because every minute counts, right? Time is brain. Brace scale, this is also an LVO or large vessel evaluation scale that can be done out in the community. A little more involved, requires some training, but those are just some examples. You might hear those used out in your communities. Then NIH, this is the big one for your ER folks and ICU folks, so you can get certified. I talked to your ER manager, and somebody was in there training, getting certified in this. And it benefits, I think they have to do it annually. You know, it's an online training that they do. Every patient should have a baseline NIH done when you arrive at your facility, and usually nurses, you know, do that, or physicians, PAs, NPs. Like, there's different stroke scales out there that you can use that are written, but I always like to put on your phone. There's some great apps that you can search for. And then stroke centers, I mentioned some of this. In Montana, we have a lot of acute stroke-ready hospitals. We do have some primary stroke centers. This shows you what their capability, obvious, as you can see the trend, the more that they can do, it kind of progressively goes up. You're going to refer patients along the way as they need more care. The big one here, though, that Montana does not have is the Comprehensive Stroke Center. You think Denver, Salt Lake, Seattle, Spokane, you know, those type of places for comprehensive stroke centers. In New York, they have a whole other issue. What center do we send them to, right? Yeah, so, and the volume has to be up. I mean, they have to have 15 endovascular procedures, you know, in their time frames and stuff, and 25 administrations of Alteplase, those type of things to even qualify to be a stroke center. You can do all these things like Missoula does. They do a lot of this anyway, but they're not a stroke center. So, did you have a question? No? Okay. So yeah, so Alteplase, let's dive into this. Again, I have no connection to the company except I just trained their clinical specialists. But Alteplase is interesting. It was invented by a female scientist at Genentech. In 1982, they first came across it. And it was FDA approved in 1996, so it's coming up on a big anniversary. It's been out for decades now. Protein involved in breakdown of blood clots. We create this in our bodies, but they developed a way how to synthesize it in larger quantities where it would be helpful in treating stroke. Catalyzes the conversion of plasminogen to plasma. There's some science for you. And it's the only FDA-approved medication for treatment of ischemic stroke. Therefore, I don't mention any other options because there are none. This is the only one so far. There, we'll give you some heartburn on this slide, mechanism of action. So let's crinkle that up and get that out of our head right now, right? We'll go easy. We'll keep it simple. I love this explanation. This is good for your patients because before you put that drug in their body that's going to melt blood clots, they want to know what it does, right? So I kind of bring out the Pac-Man scenario that I came up with. TPA, or Alteplase, it goes after plasminogen, then it acts on plasma, and then it goes after the big nasty clot, right? So Alteplase binds to fibrin, converts plasminogen to plasmin. That's the science behind it. It's clot selective, so it goes after the clots. And then plasminogen, it's just hanging out in your bloodstream. It's an active precursor of the enzyme plasmin. It's just hanging out. It binds to clots. It must be activated to dissolve the fiber though. So that's where alteplase comes into play. And then plasmin, it's the enzyme present in the blood, just kind of hanging out there until we activate everything. Degrades many blood plasma proteins, including fiber and clots. And then we got the clot. Great in trauma, not so good in heart attacks and stroke, right? So that's why we treat with alteplase. So you bring this all together, you have your happy blood vessel here. I feel like this could be for 6th graders too. Sorry if it's too simple. So you have a happy blood vessel there. There's your big nasty clot that shows up in your stroke. You deploy, your super nurse or provider, and you deploy the alteplase or TPA, hooks onto the plasminogen, activates the cycle, gets plasmin going, and that goes after the clot. And I tell patients this because it kind of gives them the mental image. You have a nice open blood vessel. Why? Because what it does, it's like taking a stick of butter in a frying pan or a microwave, it melts it. That's how it works. And that will cause light bulbs to go, because it's scary. You're going to put what in my body? But when you tell families this, they get it. And then that's going to open up blood flow. And that's how it works. So remember the stick of butter if you forget everything else. Important prescribing information. It's for, again, the treatment of ischemic stroke. They also use it in lines in the ICU to declot lines sometimes. You'll see that. The dose, don't memorize this because you definitely want to look it up. It's all based on the patient's weight. You're going to give a bolus dose, then you're going to do an IV drip over an hour. So that's how it's typically administered. Contraindications, obviously, if they have intracranial bleeding that's active, recent intracranial or intraspinal surgery, head trauma, things that are going to predispose them to have a bleed, you don't want to make that worse. So you want to definitely make sure that those are not in play. And then, obviously, it increases your risk of bleeding, as I mentioned. Adverse reactions. How many of you are afraid of alteplase? Anybody? I get that from audiences. I get that as probably the #1 reason. If we give it to our patients, the reason we don't give as much as we should is the bleed risk. Bleed risk is under 5%. If you look at the devastation of stroke, as I showed you, do you want that or do you want a risk of a bleed that's under 5%? That's an important number also to share with family members and patients as well. So fairly low. They don't do a lot of studies on pregnant women in stroke. They can have them, as you mentioned, our OB. Who was our OB folks? Yeah, you mentioned it. Absolutely. Sadly, they can have a stroke. They do give it, but usually they're beyond our level of care. They're in specialty care at that point. Geriatrics, this is interesting. I attended a conference by Ed Joust. I mentioned he's the lead author. That was our keynote. And I went to one of his presentations, and the question came up, how old is too old? Would you give a 105-year-old person alteplase? And you know what he said? He said, you would think not because they're 105 years old, right? Who cares? I mean, they're that old. They lived that long life like that. Do we want to put them at risk for bleeding? And you know what he said? He said more times than not when I talk to anybody 90 years old and above, the answer is more times than not, they want everything that you can treat them. Why? Because all their friends have had strokes by that point, or a large percentage. They've lost family members to stroke. And they recognize that, they're ancient at that age, right? Especially close to 100. And so they want every tool in the toolbox used on them because even if they have a bleed risk, they've lived a long life, but they certainly don't want to be put in a nursing home paralyzed and, incontinence and all those issues. So more times than not. So don't write off for older people, but anyone over age 77, there is an increased bleed risk. Important changes. This is since 2015, but I still have some audiences that they are going by the old guidelines. So before 2015, here's what they used to follow. The old package insert, prior stroke. If you had a stroke at all, sorry, you're not a candidate. You can't get alteplase. I'm sorry. Seizure. If you had any seizure activity or any questionable seizure activity, sorry, can't give you alteplase. If you had bleeding, diastasis, your lab values for your INR and stuff was off. You had specific measures you had to follow. Now it's kind of open to the provider, to use common sense. Intracranial hemorrhage. If you had any history across your lifespan, even if it was decades ago of intracranial hemorrhage, sorry, you can't get the alteplase. Now, recent intracranial hemorrhage. And they leave it up to the provider to decide what is recent. Was it 6 months ago? Was it yesterday? That type of thing to work out. Hypertension, they had a specific number, but they found people got really hung up on this. So obviously you don't want to give this medication at that degree of blood pressure. But you want to bring that down rapidly first in the emergency department and then treat. You sure can treat it. Blood glucose, that used to come into play too. People would not get the medication, life-saving, brain-saving medication, because their blood sugar was out of control. You absolutely want to check a blood sugar, because wouldn't it be a shame if you treated somebody for a stroke and all they needed was a little glucose, right? Yeah, because sometimes the symptoms can mask each other. So important changes there. As I mentioned, severe stroke, sometimes if the stroke was so severe, they think, why even give alteplase? Now we find some improvement, so you definitely want to consider giving it. Even with a mild stroke, subarachnoid hemorrhages change. Pregnancy, category C, always requires a consultation with OB. Nursing mothers, unknown risk, that remains. And then pediatrics, kids have strokes too, but again, specialty care is usually involved with those patients. The elderly, as I mentioned, even the very old, we still want to consider. And then GI bleeding. If you had any GI bleeding within 21 days, it can increase your risk of bleeding. They removed the 21 days because it was a hang up for providers. It's like, oh, they're on the line. You know, we can't give it. And it could have been life-saving to those patients. So check out the package insert for current updates. Now you may ask, how effective is alteplase? 50% effective. What does that mean? That means that in 90 days after they have their stroke, 50% of patients are back to independent living. That's 5 out of 10 moms, 5 out of 10 dads, 5 out of 10 grandparents back to independent living that are not living the rest of their days in a nursing home or hospice, right? So that's pretty dramatic, up to 50% efficacy. They have informed consent. You might see this in some organizations. You don't need informed consent to give this drug to a patient. It's part of their emergency care. I like an informed consent if it doesn't waste time. You don't never want to waste time because it makes sure the provider or nurse goes over all the risks related to the drug with the family and the patient. Because there's a lot to remember. All those contraindications and stuff that I just covered, it's all written down in the consent, which is kind of nice. But you don't need it. And then a checklist. Again, all that stuff is difficult to remember. So I took all that information from the package insert, made a nice one-page checklist. You know, eligibility, okay, you're eligible, go to the next step. You're not, stop here. Contraindications, okay, you have none of these, great, go to the next step. Review warning signs, we've done that too, good. Let's go ahead and give the drug, right? So kind of a stepwise approach, super easy, one page for providers to follow, and all based on the guideline. I get super excited about this. Endovascular treatment, because this is a newer treatment that a lot of people are not aware of. It just came out in the last few years, endovascular care. It's kind of like heart caths. And if you think about it, how long have we been doing heart caths? 30, 40 years now? Every facility has a cath. Does Fort Harrison have a cath lab? Or no, you send them to St. Pete's, right? Yeah, but most facilities do. So we're kind of like in that pioneering stage of treating stroke like they were with heart caths when they first came out. So there's a picture of it as I showed you in the background here. And I'll show you an actual one too and pass it around. You can remove a blood clot in minutes and then have shown high canalization rates greater than 90%. Of the time it'll open up those blood vessels and get flow going back where it needs to go. Here's some history. So alteplase, as I mentioned, in 82, 96 it was approved, and that's the only tool in the toolbox we had for all those decades. So I just cannot imagine the international stroke conferences that they hold every year. Yeah, what are we going to talk about this year? Alteplase. You know, how many times, how many different ways can you talk about alteplase? Can you imagine how boring it was? Does anybody know any neurologists? Is Dr. Dietz, I've never met the guy, but does he kind of fit the bill, kind of, you know, like a stroke nerd like me? Yeah, a little geeky. Is he a stroke geek? Yeah, he's not here, is he? No. We're talking about him. Yeah. So, yeah, but you know, they're kind of certain set. But imagine how boring their conference would be, right? Oh, alteplase, yay! You know, only tool in the toolbox. And so, but they tried. These neurologists tried. They tried everything. They thought, what if we take a device like a hose and bring it right into the blood clot in the brain and sprinkle the alteplase on the clot itself directly? That'll improve it, right? Didn't make a hill of a difference compared to, and I said hill, not the other word. It didn't make any difference compared to if they started an IV and put the alteplase in your arm versus going right into the brain with it. Didn't make any difference. Somebody else thought, what if we took a vacuum cleaner, a micro vacuum cleaner into somebody's brain and sucked the clot out? That surely would work better than sticking it in their arm. You know, the medication didn't make any difference. They were so frustrated, losing their minds, no benefits. This is Dr. Dietz on a bad day, right? Nothing is making a difference. So 2 major advancements happened in the last few years. This new device, the Stint device, came out, and I'll pass it around. Super cool. And then we stopped just doing CTs on people's brains, but we started doing CTAs. So we actually identified what vessel was involved. Here's why it didn't work before. Little vacuum cleaners, little Stint devices before, because they were trying to treat a lot of those strokes that were small vessel. They could never get the darn thing in those smaller blood vessels. So for these patients with larger vessel strokes, CTA, the only difference between that and the CT is you put dye in the body, right? It lights everything up, like on this image. So now we're treating patients appropriately with this device. So those are the two advances. I'm going to pass this around so you can check it out. And I ask you to be really careful with this. This demo model I was told was like worth a few thousand in itself. So try not to bend it. They say you can bend it. Could you flip the light switch on just for a sec in the back? Thank you. So this is the actual device, never used on a patient. So be happy about that. But they actually deploy this device into the patient through the groin all the way up into their brain. It's absolutely amazing. And then they, as I just did, advance this little stent device. It looks like a little cheese grater into the clot. It hooks into the clot, expands it, and then guess what? They just drag this device and the clot all the way out of the body. Phenomenal, right? They're doing this in Missoula. So I'm going to pass this around for you people at home or at your clinics. That is what it looks like. Super cool, right? So I'll pass that to you. And try not to bend it. They say it's even unbreakable, but let's not test that. So you take a look at that and I'll keep talking. So this device changed everything. So at the International Stroke Conference, and as I mentioned, this is in 2015, all these nerdy, kind of geeked out stroke geeks like me are sitting at this conference. Again, we're so bored talking about Alteplase. And I talked to a neurologist that went to this, and imagine a room filled with thousands. This is the International Stroke Conference. Thousands of neurologists sitting in this huge conference hall, a big jumbotron surrounding them. And then 4 studies got blasted up on the screens, and all of them started to pay attention. They were no longer bored because all 4 of these studies that they blasted up on the screens were about this device, and it changed everything, how we approach stroke. There were no more failures. We saw a difference made, and a huge difference with this device. And you can still treat a patient with Alteplase like at Fort Harrison, treat it with a clotbuster or St. Pete's, then fly them to Missoula to get the larger vessel opened up with this device. And here's what they found out. 7, remember Alteplase, 5 out of 10, 50%? 70% of patients at 90 days after their stroke are back to independent living. That's 7 out of 10 moms, 7 out of 10 dads or grandparents. That can radically change the way, our impact we're making with stroke care. And I've seen that this impacts so many different patients. So a huge difference. So I asked, well, what was the audience response when he said it was crazy? I've never seen my colleagues do this. Neurologists were standing on their chairs, clapping, hooting and hollering. And I said, that's amazing, because this is what I think about when I think about Dr. Dietz, right? or myself. I'm telling this about myself too. Kind of nerdy stroke geeks, right? Having a big festival, thousands of them. So all standing on their chairs clapping and out of control. And I said, I wish I had a picture of that. And they said, well, guess what we do? Do you want a picture of that conference? I said, you bet. I'd love to show that. So here it is. They were wild.
Oh my goodness.
They were crazy. Is this Dr. Dietz? Is he going to the mosh pit? No, that isn't the actual video. I wish I had a picture, but I had to make that up. So, but the other story is true. They were so excited because it changed stroke care. Here's an actual Stint in action. Pictures. So this is the dye they shoot up during a procedure, and this is the area of the blockage, right? No flow. This is during deployment, and check this out. 90%, I'd say that's even over 90. Opened up as they drag that clot out of the person's brain. Super cool. What does it look like when they drag it out? It looks like a clot. That was inside somebody's head, right? Yeah, that puts it into perspective, doesn't it? Alteplase will melt this down if it's given, but the longer you wait, every minute that goes by, this becomes more solid, and the damage beyond it is done, right? So that's why time is brain. That's profound. 7 out of 10 people are independent at 90 days after their stroke. They're back to work, right? I remember at our first Montana Stroke Conference, I gave my presentation like I did today, and the speaker after me was the doctor in Missoula that does this procedure, and he was going over cases, and he said, I know your story, and I knew it, and I'm going to share a different story with a different outcome. Somebody that was in their 30s had an identical stroke as my wife, same year, same summer, same everything. He went back to work within like 30 to 40 days. Independent living because of this procedure. And that was with the old Stint device where the outcomes weren't, as good as what they were. So even then, they've advanced it so much now. And this is what they're doing in Missoula. So kudos to them. So keep them in mind for a resource. So again, bleed risk. When they stick a cheese grater in your head, you're thinking, number one, I would not want to be the one doing the procedure, right? Because they would look like a sprinkler by the time I was done with them. But a very skilled team that has these skills down, like they do in Missoula and the other places, bleed risk is about 7 to 6%. So again, fairly low compared to the 7 to 10 patients independent in 90 days. And in Montana, And I don't know if you guys have this at Fort Harrison or not, it'd be something worth getting, and you just contact St. Patrick's in Missoula, their stroke program. They'll send you this, and it's an easy thing for your ER provider to look at. All the criteria here, whether it's met or not, super easy. The phone number's at the top, and that way you can get these patients expeditiously flown to Missoula where they need to be. This is all you need to do. Just call the number, go down this checklist with the other person in Missoula, it's done. Because every time that goes by, 2 million brain cells are burned. So this is a good example, gives people even in Glasgow hope, because you would think, oh, there's no way I'm going to get to Missoula from Glasgow, right? Within the window, to save all those brain cells, 74 minutes by flight from Glasgow to Missoula. How do we get this? By that flight calculator, right? Let's see if Helena is under 37 minutes from Harrison. You guys fly out of the airport at Helena, right? Yeah, so again, life-saving. So this has also changed it. What do you do for those patients where they fell asleep normal? They woke up and they can't move half their body, right? They're outside all the windows because the clot buster is 3 hours, 4.5 hours if you're pushing it. The Stint device used to be around the same time frame. Well, this data here will blow your mind. 6 to 24 hours, we're seeing about 50% normal in 90 days. Now your window is up to 24 hours. What does that do for that patient that had a stroke yesterday and comes into your ER at Fort Harrison? I had a stroke. If you didn't know this as the nurse or the provider, yeah, you're outside the window. We're so sorry. We're going to get you into rehab. No, let's get you somewhere for a further evaluation like pronto, because we could do some life-saving stuff for you. Obviously, the longer you go from baseline out, the more damage that's done, right? Less chance of recovery, but still some hope there, even for those patients. And this is the DAWN trial. And then also, diffuse, they repeated it because we like multiple studies, right? This one looked at 16-hour window. Again, 45% of the time in 90 days. Modified Rankin, independent living. Super cool for our patients. But if we don't know this information, that's what it's all about. So great stuff. So telestroke, let's talk a little bit about this. Great Falls, we're like one of the biggest hospitals in the state. For years, we didn't think we needed telestroke until we had a neurologist crisis and we didn't have enough neurologists to cover call. And then that one neurologist made it urgent that we had something in play like telestroke. We got telestroke and we kept it because we absolutely love it. Now, the old process was call the neurologist. The neurologist takes 20 to 30 minutes to get to your facility, to look at the patient, to give them the green light to go. Every minute that goes by, brain cells are dying off, right? Well, now, patient comes into your facility with stroke symptoms, be fast, which I'll talk about. You have your badge buddies for. Now, telestroke, you wheel it up to the patient's bedside. Within 4 to 6 minutes, a neurologist is online looking at your patient. And that neurologist, like it benefits, might be in Utah or Florida or somewhere in a large center where they deal with strokes all the time. So you're getting the best providers out there. They're looking at your patients, and they will give your ER folks the green light. Yeah, you should give Alteplase, or guess what? You should consider flying them out. And you're thinking, well, our radiologist hasn't even seen the CTs yet. How does that work? Guess what? When you do a CT, let's say if you were set up for this at Fort Harrison, you do a CT at Fort Harrison, it goes to their radiologist and they read it. You don't need to call your radiologist in at the middle of the night, right? Yeah, it goes to their radiologist and they're looking at the images in real time to save that patient. So this is super cool. This is a study for telestroke. Excuse me. Back up here. Just some data for telestroke if you want more information on this building program. From 2017 at Cleveland Clinic, they looked at 1,000 patients, 15 hospitals. This is amazing. They had a neurologist within 1 minute at the bedside with telestroke. How cool is that? They just blew it out of the water, and it made a huge difference for their patients and increased their treatment times. So how do you be the spark? This is what I was faced with when I was looking at stroke in my own personal experience. I wanted to do something positive to make an impact. So I looked at these studies because we had some issues with our stroke program, and I looked at these studies and I brought these to our ER manager, and I mentioned these studies previously. Went to this ER manager who's an absolute hero and friend of mine at Benefits in Great Falls, amazing leader there, and he was all on board, and so we started this brain kind of just storming process with all the staff, including the ward clerks and the registration clerks and everybody involved, to come up with ways that we can shave time off the door to needle time for stroke treatment. The results were radical. At the same time, our Genentech rep, again, I have no connection to the company financially. Caleb Warlock, he covers all of Montana. I refer to him as Bruce Wayne because in the company event, they let them drive this. Or maybe they just let them sit in it. I always tease, well, that's your company car, isn't it? Who wants to work for Genentech now, right? Yeah, but he showed up at the door, and most clinical specialists are really helpful, but they want to give you pins and then have you buy their drug, right? I mean, and give you a free lunch. They show up at your door, and they will help build the stroke program they did for us. They said, I'm going to spend 4 hours with you. Here's your clipboards. You guys lead it. We're just standing in the background, but I want you to take me through your stroke process. From when the patient, whether it's by privately owned vehicle or ambulance, enters your facility. Let's start out front. Let's physically go there and go to each person. They spent 4 hours at our facility and radically changed how we do things. We put a team together, and you think, oh, here's another team thing. It's going to take up time and money, right? We put a team of key stakeholders together with our stroke program. We had our stroke council that reviews statistics for stroke on a quarterly basis, more administrative stuff. We put an acute care stroke team together with our ER staff, anybody involved there, and we decided we're going to meet every Tuesday. And you're thinking, there's no way a team is going to be able to meet every Tuesday. Who has time, right? Every Tuesday, but here's the caveat, only for 1 hour. That's all we're devoting to this, no more, because we got to respect everybody's time. So during that time, for an hour every Tuesday, what did we do as a team? We reviewed every stroke that came in our facility. And it's somewhere lower volume, like Fort Harrison. Maybe that might be once a month you review, or once a quarter. But we looked at every stroke care that we gave on a screen like this, door to needle times, that type of stuff, what treatment they got. And then we brainstormed, how could we have shaved time off? Not to be punitive, but to be, positive about it, and to really reward those staff that did a fantastic job, and to also provide education for those staff that maybe need some education regarding stroke. And none of it was punitive. We made that clear from the start. We also tracked outcomes for our stroke patients. We gave rewards. We shared the results with staff, and we gave them rewards as time went on, and that really built a lot of momentum. This is our old process, and this is a process a lot of facilities use. Maybe even Fort Harrison follows this to some degree. Your process for any kind of care, especially stroke care, is way too long, when at the bottom of the page you need to do a U-turn and go up, right? Too many steps. So how can we simplify that? Through that brainstorming process that we invested in, we got it down to just a few steps. And we started doing multiple things at the same time, for that patient, which saved brain cells and saved lives. Now, I was thinking, how can I personalize this for Fort Harrison? Because I know you guys don't treat a lot of stroke here. They go to St. Pete's, right? Am I correct? Yeah, most of them. So I was thinking, well, why not treat at St. Pete's? If a patient comes through your door, recognizing that 2 million brain cells are dying off every minute. And I know there's eye rolls. There's like, oh yeah, we got to build a stroke program. We don't have time or resources for that. No support, or very little support. But why should you do it? Especially when you got St. Pete's right across town. Why? Because if you look at this, again, keep in mind, 2 million brain cells are dying off. 10 minutes to load up a patient, right? To get things activated, to load them up, to get them on the ambulance. 18 minutes on average, to travel 7.3 miles across town. Another 10 minutes to unload them. We're en route, doing all the prep stuff for that. That's 38 minutes. That doesn't sound like a long time, right? But 38 times 2 million brain cells. Who in the room wants to give up 72 million brain cells? Nobody. Right? My wife, when she was alive, she says, you need every brain cell you've got, right? Nobody wants to give up 72 million. Our brains have 100 billion brain cells on average, some, less than others, as my wife would tell me, but 72 million brain cells, nobody wants to give those up, right? So you can save brain cells. Let's say your stroke volume isn't that high. For that one patient, it might mean the world to them. So keep that in mind. So the other cool thing, another tool that you might want to consider, is the Rankin phone scale and the Rankin scale, and we do it by telephone. We call our patients 90 days out. Quick and easy. A nurse doesn't have to do this. It can be a hospital volunteer, anybody that can read, basically, because it's a decision tree format. And you collect the data. You see how the patients did it at 90 days after their stroke. How many of them are back to independent living, back to work, back to taking care of themselves or not. And then you report that information back to your staff, give them feedback, build that momentum that they're making a difference in these patients' lives. Again, not punitive. I pass these badge buddies out and at benefits. Something cool that we did at our hospital, because I'm still on their stroke council, even though I work for the VA now primarily. But every employee at benefits, whether it's a secretary of administration or the CEO or the janitor or the nurse or doctor, every employee has one of these badge buddies. Because when you come up on somebody and they're having some weird, you may not know what's going on with them, but if you look at this as a quick reminder, you can identify a stroke really well. And I understand You have one of your employees I'm going to recognize here in a few minutes that identified a stroke and made a huge impact. So that's something positive. So check those badge buddies out. There's more out on the table if you need them for your departments. And any CBOCs out there joining us virtually or any other organizations, let me know and I'll mail you a bunch of those as well. So be fast. How many of you have heard of FAST? Yeah, all of us, right? For stroke? Well, the latest and greatest is be fast. It has changed. And we've added balance and eyes to the algorithm. Here's your classic stroke symptoms, but we find that posterior strokes, like my wife, in the back of the head, she didn't have hardly any of this. Her balance was off, she was dizzy, and her eyes were looking in other directions. So we've added be fast, and that's making a big impact. So keep that in mind. Here's a study that kind of backs that up. They did a study, they looked at over 700 patient charts. Retrospectively, they found that 14% of those patients, they didn't have the classic fast symptoms. They were missed. So be fast would have picked it up. So it can make an impact for your patients. That's why they've added the be fast. So building the momentum, again, not punitive to make changes within an organization for your stroke care. The best way to do that for nurses is how? Coffee, right? The lifeblood of nurses everywhere. And administrators and everyone else that works in healthcare. And little treats like wristbands. So we give out coffee cards, for our patients. So something very cool to do there. And working together through all those changes that we made, we've had some really cool radical results I want to share with you as we wrap it up. I mentioned 233 minutes for my wife's stroke, organ needle time, 442 brain cells. After implementing all of these changes at our organization, again, the national goal is 0 to 60 minutes. We got 29 minutes. 29 minutes, door to needle, CT was done, everything was done. They had the medication in their arm. What did that result in? Here's that 29 minutes. Patient came in, 53, fairly young. They went home after a 7-day hospitalization. They had a lot of their function intact because of that quick responsive treatment. We thought we were just lucky. There's no way we're going to repeat that, right? Guess what? We did. 39 minutes, 2-day hospitalization. Now your financial bean counter folks are looking at that saying, whoa, a stroke, 2 days in the hospital? They're back home, nearly independent. Why? Because of rapid treatment, right? And we do it again. We did. We repeated it again. 33 minutes, 6-day hospitalization. They needed some rehab because they had some carotid issues, separate from their stroke. Again, we repeated it. 44 minutes, 5-day hospitalization. All of these patients went home, were nearly back to their independent living. 30 minutes, 2-day hospitalization. Case 6, I love. 87-year-old guy, he was sitting at home in his bathtub. He wanted to say words to his wife. He didn't say the correct word. That's how it started. Then all of a sudden, the left side of his body started going numb. And then he got out of the tub and had a hard time walking. Couldn't really talk. By the time, and his wife didn't activate EMS. How many of you have patients show up in their private vehicles, right? Oh, head against the wall, right? But they drove into town. And so she got him to the hospital. He's completely aphasic, could not talk at all. Left-sided paralysis by the time he got to the hospital, 33 minutes. And this gives me goosebumps because guess how I found out about him? I was his VA primary care provider. I saw him for follow-up in the office. I found all this information afterwards. And I have a signed consent, by the way, to show his picture and name. Follow the rules. But here's Jerry and his lovely wife. I went to his house to check on him. Here's Jerry, aphasic, left side of his body completely numb and he couldn't function or move. Here's Jerry and his cute little dog too. So he wants to thank all of you in the VA. He's so appreciative of the VA folks, including those folks here at Fort Harrison. But here is a positive outcome for a stroke if we treat it right? Time is brain. So this is my favorite part. In addition to talking about folks like Jerry, I love to recognize stroke heroes. My boys and I, that 4 Coyotes thing that I mentioned earlier on, you can go ahead and turn the light on. Thank you. We were sitting around the table thinking, Dad, there's so many cool people we've met, coast to coast now. When we present, can we give them an award of some kind? And so being in the military, a challenge coin came to mind. So we developed this challenge coin. And I'll show you a picture of that here. Pull it up for you to recognize stroke heroes. And on this challenge coin that we developed, I said, okay, what's the favorite picture you have of you and your mom? And they said, well, we love the one on the beach in California. So we took this picture and put it on the back of a challenge coin. And here's the coin. And that 4 Coyotes, you know what it turned into? We want to adopt people into our fight against stroke, and we want to make them an honorary 5th Coyote to take the mantle and to knock out stroke with us. And so this coin we've given to countless people. over the years. There's some pictures here. Last year, I had the honor, gosh, I was so humbled to get an award from Senator Daines, who came to our CBOC. Senator Daines talked about stroke in my presentation on the floor of the Senate. And little did he know that the Coyotes were going to show up and adopt him into our pack. So he was a little surprised. He said, "Hey, wait a second, you know?" Yeah, but we made him an honorary Coyote. So again, there's lots of fifth Coyotes out there. Some folks from benefits, our lieutenant governor at the time. So I have some more Coyotes I want to have join our pack. I know some can't be here because they're out working. But is Patrice here? Patrice? Oh, yes. Come on up, Patrice. Yes. Yes. And we have other folks, if Deborah, Wendy, David, Ruth, Vicky, Christina, our amazing audiovisual gal here, or Leonard. If any of you are here, please come up. Dr. Bauer, I know, is probably busy too, so come on up, yes. So, and Christina running the camera here, yeah. So, but yeah, I just want to recognize all of you for having me here to talk about stroke and create awareness and build that relationship and that connection. So I have a coin for each of you, and if you would take one and pass it down, there you go. Enough for all 5 of you here. We'll get the other ones some, and Christina, yours as well. And then if you would see me after, and I just have a plaque to give each of you. Wendy, there you go, Wendy. Thank you. You bet. Yeah, you're an honorary fifth Coyote, so I expect you to howl now, all right, Deborah? Deborah? Sorry with the mask. Yeah. Your best howl when we're all done here. There you go. Thank you. And Patrice, I understand you're the staff member that recognizes stroke symptoms. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. So, and Vicki, there you go. Thank you very much. And Stephen, right? And Ruth Kinney, she's not here, is she? No, they're busy. Yeah. So let's see, Stephen. David, DW in the house. There you go. So yeah, so thank all of you. Yeah, it's great. Do you want to see them howl before they're?
Yes.
All right, on the count of 3. You ready? 1, 2, 3. Honorary fifth Coyotes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you.